Look at your own attention. You did not arrive here by accident. You are here because a question has been forming beneath the surface of your awareness, a specific discomfort with the noise. This is not a random feeling, it is the first sign of a psychological differentiation. The modern world trains you to react, to scroll for escape, but a smaller number scroll searching for orientation. The difference is decisive. My thesis is this. Leadership is not a role you seek, but a condition you grow into when an inner structure becomes more ordered than the environment, emerging from the refusal to abandon meaning when it becomes inconvenient. This discomfort is the beginning of an internal resistance to being shaped entirely from the outside. It is not superiority, it is a fatigue with constant performance, a suspicion toward easy answers. Where others adjust to incoherence, you feel it as pressure. This is the unconscious starting point of the task, the sacrifice of childish dependence on external signals and the assumption of an individual stance. The stakes are personal and immediate. To mistake this awakening for isolation is to abort the process. What you feel is the struggle between collective inertia and the urge toward a coherent self. So we begin with a concrete fact of your own psyche. The environment is saturated with signals. What is the nature of this modern world that creates such pressure? Consider the common adaptation to signal saturation. Most people scroll to escape themselves, a numbing response to the pressure of constant information. The world trains attention to react, not to see, and this numbing is a logical, almost biological adaptation to an overwhelming environment. The collective stakes are civic stagnation. A society that adapts through numbness is one that forfeits judgment for the ease of automatic reaction. It is a world where the current carries everyone, and few feel the drag of its direction. Yet a few internalize this saturation as pressure, sensing a misalignment not just in the world but in their own position within it. This is not a mark of superiority but a different form of sensitivity. Where others adjust, they question. This internalized pressure is the raw material, the discomfort that refuses to be anesthetized. It is the first signal that the individual's psychology must begin to correspond to a need for order that the environment itself cannot provide. The transformation from a feeling into a formative principle begins here, with a simple, stubborn question. How does one cease to be shaped entirely from the outside? That fatigue you feel when you scroll, the suspicion toward easy answers, is the first signal. It is the personal discomfort with incoherence, the inability to dissolve into the noise. You notice a misalignment, not just in the world, but in your own position within it. This is not cynicism, it is the beginning of discernment. Where others adjust, you question. Where others conform, you pause. This refusal to move automatically is the quiet internal resistance that marks the start of leadership. It is a psychological mechanism. The saturation of external signals creates a pressure that demands an inner counter-pressure. Your attention, trained to react, begins instead to resist being shaped entirely from the outside. The world rewards speed, but you feel the burden of fragmentation. This pause is the seed of an inner order. It is the moment you cease being carried by the current and start to feel the weight of the water. How, then, does this nascent structure hold when the entire environment is designed to provoke reaction? This training of attention to react, not to see, is the precise mechanism by which the environment shapes the collective mind. Its reward for speed over judgment creates a power dynamic. It conditions us to respond to external signals before we can consult an internal compass. A smaller number scroll searching for orientation precisely because they are resisting this conditioning, beginning to feel that the noise is not just external but reflects an internal misalignment. This is not a quest for more information, but for a principle of selection. The stakes are collective. A society composed of reactors is a society without a center, vulnerable to every prevailing current because it lacks the internal resistance that defines genuine sovereignty. The danger here is to misinterpret this emerging internal order as a license for detachment or a claim to superiority. This is a critical limit. The inner structure that becomes more ordered than the environment is not a fortress for isolation, but a source of coherence that others can sense. It is the opposite of the barbarism that projects inner disorder onto the neighbor. The power lies not in directing others but in the refusal to abandon meaning, thereby offering a point of orientation that commands no one. But how does one navigate the inevitable distortions of this nascent state? This internal ordering, this condition of being more structured than one's environment, is not a license for isolation. The news summary warns against mistaking this awakening for superiority or detachment. That is a critical tension. If you interpret your growing clarity as a reason to separate yourself from the collective noise, you have misunderstood the mechanism. The purpose of an ordered inner structure is not to build a higher wall but to create a clearer signal. This is why the summary states, people follow clarity long before they follow commands. The concept is not about issuing directives from a distance, it is about embodying a coherence that others can sense and orient themselves toward, which is an act of connection, not withdrawal. The restraint and responsibility emphasized are the necessary checks on this process. Leadership requires restraint before expression, listening before instruction, and responsibility before influence. This is the practical limit. Without this discipline, the movement toward inner order risks degenerating into mere contrarianism or another form of performative authority. You assume responsibility first inwardly for your own coherence, precisely to avoid the future risk of wielding influence carelessly. The stakes are the quality of the connection you can then foster. If this internal development is mistaken for a final destination, it becomes just another static identity, another fixed point in the noise, and cedes its generative power. So the fundamental choice ahead is not between comfort and a solitary enlightenment, it is between comfort and a coherence that, by its very nature, must engage. So we arrive at the synthesis. This video did not find you to make you a leader. The concrete fact of its arrival is a signal, not an appointment. It found you because a specific internal threshold is being approached. Leadership, in its earliest form, is already beginning to find you. The mechanism is not about acquiring a title but about a developing incapacity, the inability to fully dissolve into the noise, that saturation of signals the news summary describes. The fundamental choice now clarifies. You can choose comfort, which is the path of least resistance within the current. It is the continued adaptation through numbing, the scrolling to escape. Or you can choose coherence, which is the far more difficult work of inner ordering. This is not a choice about superiority but about responsibility. The news summary frames it starkly. What happens next depends on whether you choose comfort or coherence. To ignore this signal, to retreat from the pressure of your own discernment, is to accept a permanent fragmentation. The likely psychic consequence is a life lived at cross purposes, where your actions never align with your deepest recognitions, and that internal misalignment becomes a chronic quiet fatigue. The future is shaped not by those who shout first, but by those who, sensing the disorder, refuse to abandon meaning when others let it go.